Dissension and disagreement is an important part of our societal discourse. It allows us to engage in thought-provoking and robust conversations. However, with the social, economic, racial, and political tensions so high today in America, the question remains, how can we have compelling and thoughtful conversations with those we disagree with? To restore unity and see all sides of every perspective of an issue. Jonathan Mahan is doing his part to contribute to this discussion. He's the host of a podcast called Courageous Conversations, where he tackles important issues surrounding race, religion, politics, and societal life. He joined me this week to discuss his own life experiences and how we can all find some common ground. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. You ready, Jonathan? I'll take a few seconds and welcome you to the program, and I'm excited to learn all about courageous conversations and a little bit about your personal life. Great to see you this morning, and thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
So, Jonathan, you say that there are three things you need to be true about your life before you die. So, I'm wondering if I can start you off by asking you what those three things are and why they're so important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually interesting. A mentor of mine a few years ago just kind of asked me this question, right? When it's your time to leave this earth, what do you need to be true about your life? And I thought about it. I came up with some answers, and what's interesting is those answers haven't changed in the last few years. Um, so one, I need to know that I gave everything I had in everything that I did. I don't want to have to deal with the regret of just wondering, if I had actually like put some real effort in, if I just pushed a little harder, what could I have accomplished, right? I don't want to have to deal with that regret. I want to know I gave it all I had. So that's one. And the other one is I want to be a catalyst in other people's life. All around me, I see people who have so much potential to do so much, but there's just some barrier, something that gets in the way of them realizing that potential, right? Oftentimes it's some kind of emotional or psychological or confidence barrier. Sometimes it's a resource barrier, but one way or another, there's tons of people with potential that never gets realized. So that's important to me, right? That I can be a catalyst in other people's lives. And then the third one is that I want to show the world a better way to live. There are just so many examples of where we all seem to have these unspoken rules that we follow to everyone's mutual detriment, right? These ways that we're expected to behave that aren't good for anyone. Great example, right, is as a man, there's this societal pressure of like how I'm supposed to show up as a man and not show emotion and be stoic and, not be involved with my kids' lives. And like, I mean, just there's various right aspects of masculinity that are expected of me that don't help anyone. Like every one of us is harmed by these ideals. And sometimes all it takes is one person to just stand up and say, no, actually, I'm a man who loves me some scented candles. Not masculine, but who cares, right? And just like be that person to show that there's another way to do it. There's a better way to live. And once that one person steps up, it gives permission for everyone else who's been feeling that way to go ahead and step up too and start living differently. So that's the third one that's important to me, is to show the world a better way to live.
And I know part of that progression and involvement has you hosting a podcast called Courageous Conversations, where you talk about race, religion, politics, and just general life circumstances. So can you tell me about the podcast and the message that you're hoping to deliver?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the purpose of that show, right, is just to, I guess, kind of threefold. It's inspiring people to have their own courageous conversations by showing them how good it can be, how interesting these conversations can be, and how rewarding these conversations can be. It's removing people's fear for having these courageous conversations on their own, right? A lot of people would never dream of talking about some of these awkward topics that I'm having with my guests. And then third is kind of give people a pattern, a blueprint to follow, right? As to how to have these conversations in a way that's healthy and productive. So, my first batch of episodes, I'm very much focusing on the really hard conversations of talking with people I disagree with. So kind of the pilot episode we've already done, it was myself, who I'm very, very liberal and progressive, talking with an avid Trump supporter the week after the election. Coming in January, I'll be talking with a avid, staunch libertarian about government regulations. After that, I'll be talking with a pretty diehard conservative Republican about race and racism in the U.S. Right. One of the last episode of January, I'm really looking forward to. There's actually a friend of mine who has kind of a congenital disorder, something that's going to make him live a very short life from birth. And he's kind of known this from birth. And he's getting to the age now where it's one, just statistically speaking, right? Most people with this condition usually die somewhere in the next decade. So we're going to be talking about death. And that's going to be that one really scares me, right? Talking about death with someone who has some type of a terminal illness that, any day now could take him out. But again, this is the type of conversation that most people would never have because it's way too uncomfortable. And this podcast can be dedicated to that, right? We're going to take it past that, right? We'll have a lot of conversations involving race, both with people of different races talking, and white people talk about race, and like a lot of different combinations there. We'll have conversations between family members, right? In particular, I have a suite of episodes I plan on doing where we're going to have different members of different generations, right? Talking about maybe taboo subjects that you usually don't talk about with your mom and your grandma, right? Just again, difficult conversations that we tend to avoid because they'll be awkward or uncomfortable. And it seems like the whole world is worse off for us not having these conversations, right? Our own individual relationships don't have a chance to develop, in some cases die off. And as a culture and as a society, we're not able to really progress very well because we don't have these difficult conversations. So it's going to be a very interesting show, right? Certainly a very entertaining show, but hopefully it's also going to be just a small way to help more communication happen. Because I really do believe that when those difficult conversations don't happen, we as individuals are worse off, and we as a culture are worse off as well.
Well, having difficult conversations is a good way to grow individually. Certainly gives you a better perspective on different perspectives for sure. So I'm going to ask you also, obviously, I live in Canada, and you guys over in the States just went through your US presidential election, and certainly the last 4 to 5 years politically in America have been culturally and politically divided. So I'm wondering, since you've been talking about politics and race on your podcast, what your personal opinion is about how do you think we lower the temperature politically to get America better aligned with a democracy and sort of getting back to cultural norms politically?
I think that communication between the groups is incredibly important. Difficult conversations is incredibly important. Because like I said, I'm a liberal progressive. The only people I talk about politics with are other liberals and progressives. And my conservative uncle, the only people he talks about politics with is other conservatives. And you get this echo chamber effect, right? Where you support each other's beliefs and you demonize the other group, and there's this growing rift. I was listening to a podcast a few weeks ago and talked about when measuring political division, political scientists measure two things. They measure division of beliefs, right? As far as hey, how far apart are their stances on different issues? And they measure kind of a more emotional division, right? How much we dislike people on the other side of the aisle. And in the last 10 years in the US, like ideological division has not changed. We disagree with each other as much as we did 10 years ago on the left and the right. That hasn't changed. However, the emotional division, how much we dislike the other group, has skyrocketed in the last 10 years. And again, I think a big cause of that is social media algorithms enhancing this echo chamber effect, right? Because what happens on social media? I'm scrolling through Facebook, I see some page that posts some liberal progressive status that I like or meme that I like, and I like that page. I follow that page, and then I see more of their stuff. I scroll through and I see some page by some far right-wing extremist group, and I really don't like it, and I block them. Same thing with friends, right? I mean, how many of us have de-added a friend or family member because we're sick and tired of seeing their political posts that disagree with us? So we create our following and those that we follow based on our preferences and what we like to see. Also, that's amplified by Facebook's algorithm, right? Even if you don't unfollow a certain friend, if you tend to avoid their posts, Facebook is just going to keep showing you more and more of what you like. So what happens is we end up living in this world, which is perfectly curated to be the world we want to see, right? With the truths we want to see, the realities we want to see, the opinions we want to see, everything the way we want it on social media, being reinforced by other people who also want to see the same thing. And then when someone from the other side of the political spectrum, we come across them, it just blows us away how this person can be so stupid and how are they so out of touch. And it's almost like we live in different worlds, because I really say we do live in different worlds, especially in this quarantine world where for most of us, our interaction with the globe at large is predominantly being funneled through the internet. And for most of us, predominantly through social media, right? I'm not an avid news watcher. It's really the only news I see is what news gets shared onto Facebook or shared onto LinkedIn, right? So we end up being in this situation where for a progressive, the world that I live in, right, is a world where Trump's a liar and immoral and the country's going to hell because of conservatives and the Black Lives Matter movement is the best thing ever. And this is the world I live in because all the stories I hear, all the opinions I hear, all the inputs coming at me from the outside world are painting the same picture. And it's the picture that I like to have painted for me, that Facebook knows I like to have painted for me. So it just reinforces that picture of the world. And I end up living in this world where someone else who in previous years has told Facebook they like a different world, they like a different painting of the world, they like a different stream of news, gets a completely different set of inputs coming their way about what's going on in the wider world, what Trump's doing, what the Black Lives Matter movement is doing, what corporate America is doing. They literally get a different picture painted for them of the world based on the news they consume, the people they talk to, etc. So we literally end up living in different worlds because, of course, we don't interact directly with the world, we interact with the world through the internet and social media, and we end up getting a different picture of the world painted for us. So the only way to break that down is to have more communication between people on the left, people on the right. I need to have a chance to experience what their world is looking like to them, and they need to have a chance to experience what my world is looking like to me. We're still going to disagree, right? But at least now we can understand, okay, I know where he's coming from now because I know what his world looks like, right? It was really fascinating to me, that conversation I had with the Trump supporter. So we found out in that conversation that we had a lot of common values. We value the same things, we believe the same things, our sense of morality was very similar. We had a ton of shared values, way more than I expected. I also found out that back in 2016, he and I believed the same thing about Trump. He and I both believed Trump couldn't be trusted and was a pathological liar, and just all the terrible things that I believe about Trump, he believed as well. So here we have two people with the same value system and the same opinion about Trump, and then 4 years later, we have completely different opposite opinions about Trump. And the only thing we could figure out in that conversation that was different was I follow a bunch of progressive people and progressive pages, and he follows a bunch of conservative people and conservative pages. So every time Trump messed up, lied, or did something despicable, I knew about it 10 times over. And he really never heard about those things. Every time Trump made good on his word and did something good and honorable, I never heard about it, but he heard about it constantly. So we literally live in a different world where we're seeing different information coming our way, different inputs coming our way, and therefore our opinions have diverged hugely just through that. And again, because I don't talk to anyone conservative about politics or Trump, I never heard any of those things. And because he doesn't talk to anyone leftist about politics or Trump, he never heard any of those things. And it allows us to continue to live in completely different and isolated worlds. So I think these conversations, whether they happen online or offline, is the key to bringing down the temperature. We'll always disagree, and that's okay. And we'll always resist each other's initiatives because we have different beliefs about what's good in the world, and that's okay, right? I'm not, advocating for some world where, we just sit back passively and let the evils of the world go unchecked. But I think it's important for healing the divide to have a realistic idea of what the other person really believes and thinks and feels, to have those conversations so you can identify where you have shared values, right? That was surprising to me, like I said. And then even just to have enough conversations with them that you can understand that their world looks different than your world, right? The news they're hearing is highlighting different things than yours. So you can at least start to see them as a human being worthy of, decency and respect, even if you still disagree with them.
And in terms of the current political landscape, when you look out 34 days from now, when President-elect Biden takes office, what do you think he's walking into in terms of the state of American politics, and how do you think he should go about trying to unify the country?
So, due to Trump's insistence on fraud in a corrupt election, despite no credible evidence of such, he's going to be coming into a country where a lot of the country doesn't think Biden deserves to be there. They think the election was rigged. They think it was all corrupt power that put him there, that it wasn't the will of the people that put him there because of Trump's baseless claims. Now, of course, to clarify here, if evidence comes out that that is the case, I'll be as pissed off as the Republicans are. Like, there is nothing more important to me than the integrity of the elections. However, every single judge, even ones appointed by Trump, have been throwing his cases out because there's no evidence of it. Different U.S. agencies that are appointed with the task of monitoring for corruption in the elections have all said, no, this is probably the cleanest election we've had in a long time. So assuming that not the entire world is in on the conspiracy, it seems like it was good. But people have been so conditioned for the last 4 years to see Trump as their one shining star of truth in a world full of corruption and lies and deceit. There's a lot of people who are quite willing to throw away the evidence of 99% of the world and just go on the word of Donald Trump and nothing else, unfortunately. So I think there's going to be a country where a lot of people don't think Biden deserves to be there and thinks it was corruption that got him there. So that'll be really rough, right? As far as, how Biden should go about, addressing this, I really think that sounds weird to say, right? Because again, I'm a big progressive and not a fan of people on the political right. I think that he needs to lead the way in showing people on the right some basic respect and decency, right? That I oftentimes say that I believe a big part of what got Trump in office was the behavior of people on the left for the last decade. Because for the last decade, right, as the world grows and generally more progressive, people on the left have just been tearing into people on the right and calling them racist and closed-minded and bigoted and misogynistic and homophobic, and just really seeing everything they don't like about the political right and just attacking it verbally and disrespecting it and smearing their names through the mud and being very adversarial, right? And again, it's all in the name of calling out evil and speaking good. So, it's well-intentioned, of course, but the way they're going about it is really, really disrespectful to people on the right and treating them very inhumanly. So what we have is this whole massive chunk of America who's being told constantly, you're inhuman, you're evil, you're awful, you're bigoted, you're hateful. None of that feels right to them. And they're just getting tired of being insulted and dragged through the mud and disrespected and told that they should be ashamed of being who they are and what they believe, right? And they're tired of it. And then here comes Donald Trump. And Donald Trump starts telling them all the things they want to hear. And Donald Trump starts telling them, no, you're angry and that's okay. And no, these are very good people here. They should be listened to. And no, you're not racist. And he starts telling them all the things they've been wanting to hear and all the things that they've been feeling inside. And they stick to him like glue, like a moth to the flame. They are attracted to this guy to the point where he creates this ridiculous fanatical amount of loyalty to him because he's the one person in the whole world who's willing to give respect back to these people who have been vilified, right? And I think that's why we got such a fanatical attachment to Donald Trump. If for the last 10 years, the left had been calling out the wrongs done by the political right, but doing so with kindness, empathy, compassion, and patience, right? this group of people wouldn't have been hurting so bad for that recognition and that respect that Trump gave them, right? They probably still would have liked him, but they wouldn't have been as blinded to his faults and his flaws. And when he started showing his true colors, they would have been kind of repulsed by it, because there wouldn't have been this visceral emotional connection with him that was created by, again, the left being so harsh and cruel to people on the right for so long. So my personal beliefs is that, if we're going to have the political right start to turn and open their eyes and open their mind to a worldview that isn't their own, perspective that isn't their own, I think it's going to start with us treating them with a basic amount of decency, respect, patience, kindness, empathy, etc. And again, I'm not advocating for just sitting back and letting the wrongs and the ills of that worldview take over. But I'm saying, as you're resist with patience, kindness, empathy, and compassion, right? See these people who, for example, I do a lot of anti-racist work. So in the world of racism, right? See people who are blind to racism, blind to the white supremacy of our culture, and blind to the injustice of it all. See that more as a mental condition afflicting them, or an unfortunate bias that's taken over their mind, like some kind of disease that they need to be freed of, that they need to be cured of, right? And again, if there's somebody who's afflicted by some mental bias that's taking over their mind, you should come at it with more compassion and empathy. Still try to guide them out, still try to resist it. But again, don't just do it with insults. So I would say, yes, if I was placed in the presidency as a leftist Democrat president, the first thing to healing wounds would be to, while still maintaining certain standards of right and wrong, go about the process of calling out wrong with a lot more empathy and compassion, and treating people on the right with empathy and compassion instead of just calling them a bunch of racist, bigoted assholes and leaving it at that.
So when we look at, we talked about having better communications earlier in terms of getting people to see the other side of a conversation. But I'm wondering also your thoughts on how we get people to become more vulnerable to have these uncomfortable conversations, so that they have a more full or whole view of whether it be political, race, or religion. How do we get people to be more comfortable having more vulnerable conversations?
That's hard. In general, answering the question, how do you get a population of people to be more comfortable being vulnerable? I think that really comes down to how we parent our kids is the biggest thing we can do. Just because, if you're 50 years old and have spent your whole life avoiding vulnerability, there's only so much that can be done. However, young people, right, are a lot more able to be influenced. In fact, I would even say that the default for human beings is comfort being vulnerable. It's our scars over time that make us uncomfortable with vulnerability. So I'd say parenting children in such a way that vulnerability is shown to them, right? So I always make sure with my daughters that I'm willing to show myself being vulnerable with them, but also allowing them to be vulnerable without, getting hurt from it. But, when it comes to the general population, not just, our kids, I think it's similar to a theory of horse training that I learned a while back. Me and my wife own horses, and a few years back we trained a horse and did some research into different theories around horse training, right? And one of the things that I remember was a very simple model where basically you imagine a circle, right? A circle of comfort that a horse has, and your job as a trainer is just to take the horse outside that circle of comfort, then bring it back in, and everything's okay. Every time you do that, the circle gets bigger, right? Where, of course, every time you take the horse outside its comfort zone and it gets hurt, that circle gets smaller. And that's kind of how you envision, right, growing the circle of comfort zone. So a lot of people, through especially interactions online, because we know how harsh people are online, a lot of people have stepped out of their comfort zone to start having a conversation online about something that makes them feel a little uncomfortable, expressing their views on race or transgender bathrooms or whatever it is, right? And it has not gone well. Whether you're on the left or on the right, people have just descended down to the level of cruel insults, and nothing productive happens. And then that comfort zone, as far as being comfortable with uncomfortable conversations, shrinks. And unfortunately, I think most people who wander into difficult conversations online end up having a bad experience, and that comfort zone shrinks, right? So I would say, if you're going to start off with difficult conversations, have some in person, right? Generally in person, they tend to go better, because people, have a harder time being cruel to someone they can see, stare at face to face than someone who's just behind a keyboard. I'd also say if you're the type of person who engages in debates online, try to give people a positive experience of it, right? And this is hard, but every time I'm browsing through the internet and I see someone on the political right who has been blinded by racism and can't see the reality of racism, starts adding their comments, right? And I hate their comments. I disagree with their comments. I see their comments as the root of all evil. I try to make sure that person at least has a positive experience with this. And as I go about engaging them and debating them and countering their ideas, I do so with a certain base level of respect and empathy and kindness so that they're more likely to even hear my words, right? If you're insulting someone, they tend to shut out everything you're saying. So in the moment, I think it helps make them more likely to hear what I'm saying. But also it makes them more likely to engage in conversations in the future. And it kind of models for everyone on the comment thread what it can look like to call out someone's BS without being harsh, cruel, and demeaning, right? So I think it's make sure that every time someone goes for a difficult conversation, do everything in your power to make sure they have a positive experience of it so their comfort zone can expand rather than contracting.
And Jonathan, I'm wondering what your parting message would be to people about embracing what life has to offer in terms of embracing awards and embracing the full experience of life and the ups and the downs.
I've always found that in life, the crummy parts of life are mandatory, they're unavoidable. But the best parts of life are usually optional and they take a little extra effort. I see this all the time in parenting, right? When you're a parent, the parts of parenting that really suck, you cannot avoid, right? Kid gets sick and throws up all over the floor, can't avoid that. Tyler running around the house making a mess of everything, you can't avoid that. Those are the parts of parenting that are mandatory, the terrible parts. However, best parts, taking your kids out sledding or coloring with them or wrestling or playing, those things are entirely optional. You can choose to do those or you can choose to not do those. And I see that all across life, right? Getting a job that pays the bills and showing up at the job and doing your job, that's pretty well mandatory. Starting a personal passion project on the side that gives you a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose and excitement, that's entirely optional, right? Again, pretty much mandatory to, pay your bills, pay your taxes, and mow your lawn. But forming great relationships with friends and going on hiking trips and stuff like that, that's optional. So what ends up happening sometimes is when we feel a little bit burnout, when we feel like, we don't have a lot to give, we tend to retreat into this like minimum effort possible model. And you got to understand when you're in the minimum effort possible model, you're only getting the mandatory parts, which are the crummy ones, and you're not getting any of the best parts, which are optional and take a little extra effort. So it's really hard, but when I'm feeling burnout, when I'm feeling like I don't have energy, just want to lay on the couch and do nothing, I try to force myself to do some of those optional things that I know bring me joy, right? So if I feel like just laying on the couch on my phone and doing nothing because I'm exhausted after a work day, I'll force myself to play hide and seek with the kids because I know by doing that, I'll actually be refilling my glass, refilling my energy, both emotional and physical energy from doing that. So just beware of this least effort possible model, right? It's so easy to slip into a least effort possible model when you're tired and you feel burnout. But understand that by doing that, you are choosing to experience only the worst parts of life and to miss out on the best parts of life, which is not going to refill your glass and make you feel full again, right? So resist that, put in the extra effort that leads to, joy and meaning.
Hey, Jonathan, we've had a very heavy conversation this morning, so I'm wondering if we can lighten it up just a little bit. And I'm curious to know what would be three things people would be surprised to learn about you, buddy.
Well, seeing as I'm a able-bodied straight white male, most people be surprised to see how active I am in, resisting oppression in all its forms, both resisting, sexism and ableism and racism. I'm fairly aware of those forces and dedicate, I don't know, significant, even though I could do more, but a significant amount of energy to resisting those things. That's not common in people who look like me. Me and my wife have been dating and of course now married since I was 14. So not only high school sweethearts, but like middle school sweethearts. Most people are surprised by that. A lot of times people are surprised by my age too, right? Less as I get older. But now I'm 26, and a lot of people still seem surprised by that, right? Like they expect me to be in my 30s or something. So I guess that's the other thing that people find surprising.
And just finally, how can people get connected with you if they want to do that, bud?
Oh, I would say LinkedIn is probably the only social media platform that I really have much of a presence on. So Jonathan Mahan, right? That's Jonathan. Last name Mahan, Mahan. So currently my profile picture is like me with some yellow leaves in the background. So if you're listening to this fairly soon, you'll probably see that picture. I'm the type of person who pretty much never changes my profile pictures. So it wouldn't surprise me if next year it's still the same thing.
And there's nothing wrong with consistency, right?
Yep. Well, that, and I don't get a lot of pictures taken of me. So if I find a good one, it's like, okay, well, probably going to be a while before I get another good picture taken.
Uh, Fabulous. I want to thank you for a few minutes, Jonathan, and having a great and revealing conversation with me this morning about a number of important topics. I want to thank you for your time and for being here this morning. It's most appreciated.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Kevin. This is a fun way to start a Friday.
Fantastic, Jonathan.